Okay, we're back. It got cut off there. Let's see. Where do I start? Okay, so strict monotheism. Yes, a strict monotheism, as we find in sort of the Islamic tradition and in Jewish tradition, they both believe in a God who is one, but they believe that God Himself is relational and desires relationships. And so when He created the world, He creates human beings to be relational, and then and relate to Him in a certain way, but also to relate to one another. And then on the basis of His own nature, God has commanded certain types of relationships to kind of fall in line there. So God is relational. He's created human beings to be relational, and therefore He has commanded relationships to to sort of reflect His nature. Now, in monotheism, we also have the tradition of Trinitarianism, which is found in most Christian traditions. And it says that God is triune, and so God exists as Father, Son, and Spirit. And even within God, there are relationships. God relates to Himself in the context of relationships. So the idea of relationship is grounded wholly in God. And then God creates human beings after the pattern of the Trinity to exist in especially in terms of sexual partners or married partners. You would have man, woman, and then they would be they would come together in a relationship that would make them one. And so God says that they'll become one flesh. And so we have the diversity of two different people, and then the unity in the marriage relationship, and that is meant to reflect God in His triunity. And then He commands those relationships that reflect Him, and He puts boundaries around those relationships in order to define them as He sees fit. So that would be that would be how God would command there. Now, pantheism is another view of God that is more of an Eastern view. This kind of goes in line with the Buddhist and Hindu traditions. Now, they believe God to be one, and they see God as one, and divisions in the nature of the world seem to be sort of those are basically an illusion. Basically, those would see, though, the nature of God is in His oneness is in some ways a balance of opposites. We see this in sort of this is reflected in the yin yang symbol, where you've got the black and the white, and they sort of divide the circle up, but they're an essential part of the circle. If you get rid of one, then it's just looks like a fish thingy, right? But the yin yang is sort of symbolic of this idea that these opposites come together, they balance one another out, and they become one. They're one in nature, in essence. There, human beings in relationships should reflect that balance, the balance of opposites, and therefore the relationship of marriage is a balance of opposites in that sense, where the opposites come together and they make a whole. And that would be more of a pantheistic view. And so different religions are going to teach different specific sexual mores, and commands are going to be a little bit different between each one of them. But essentially, they're going to ground sexual morality in their concept of God, in His commands, and the commands of God are the source of our knowledge of morality in the world. That would be them. So in order to derive your ethics or your morality from that, you would have to know what are the commands of God, and not only where to find them, but also what they are. You would have to go through and determine what they are. Now this becomes interesting, because even within different religions, or even within the same religion, to take for instance the Christian tradition, there are many understandings about what constitutes moral principles surrounding sexuality. There are many denominations who recently have been very okay and openly so with the idea of same-sex marriage and homosexual relationships as being acceptable by God. And then there are others who go back and understand the command of God to be very much against those things. And so even within there can be a diversity of opinions even within the context of a religious tradition, a single religious tradition. I think it points back to the problem of understanding what are the commands of God, where do we find those, and what are they. So anyhow, but that's how divine command would determine whether or not different sexual behaviors are morally acceptable. Okay, well, the one issue that your book brings up, and I want to talk about, because I think that the summary presentation was a little bit weak. I do think that they bring out some better differences as you look through the original source reading in your book. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue of same-sex marriage. Excuse me. And just maybe bring up some ideas. Now, you will find in the discussion forum that I've assigned for this week, I've asked you to read over John Finnis's view of the relationship, or his view of same-sex marriage, but don't just stop there. Read the one that follows as well, and see what some of the arguments are there, because the one that follows, that's John Corvino, in his essay, it's not natural. That is John Corvino gives a critique of natural law as it's used to often to brought into the conversation of same-sex marriage. And so, if you read both of those, it can provide you a really kind of balanced view of where some people are at regarding the issue of same-sex marriage and why they take the positions that they do. And in your discussion forum, I'm going to ask you to respond to a question there that you'll look at and respond to. But not only respond to, I want you to also interact with your classmates on that question. So you'll post your response to it, and then read some other people's. You might have to wait till later in the week to do that, but go back and read some other people's and see what they've said, and then respond to some of their posts. Go ahead and don't be afraid to engage. Do it respectfully, and where you have differences of opinion, respectfully disagree, and have a little discussion there, so you can hone your understanding of your own understanding of what of this concept. Now, my some preliminaries in my understanding of the whole same-sex marriage debate is that oftentimes it's unfortunately sort of it comes down to people sort of shouting cliches at one another, and whatever can fit on a bumper sticker or on a tweet. Those generally becomes our mantras by which we march and promote our particular side of the issue. This particular natural law argument comes in, and you'll read about this also in the final treatment. I don't recall his name right off the top of my head, but the final treatment that you'll read about in the chapter is by a man who's considering the natural argument the natural law argument as it pertains to arguing against homosexuality. He's critiquing that, brings up a lot of good points there. But anyway, the argument typically goes something like this: look, even if a homosexual man is aroused, his body responds in such a way that it prepares itself for sex with a woman, because the parts don't fit together quite right. For man and man. Now, there are parts there that can fit together, but anatomically speaking, those parts that a man has, by which men have sex with men, they aren't built in the same way that the parts that the women have, so those aren't built for penetration. They're not built for sustaining that kind of activity. You can come up with some various injuries because of that, and so because of that, then one would conclude that because of a man's anatomical considerations, because of that, that men are not meant to have sex with men. And the same thing with women. Even when a homosexual woman becomes aroused, her body responds in such a way so as to prepare it for intercourse with a man, not for intercourse with another woman. The parts, again, don't fit together, and one has to improvise at that point. So that's one argument that's made, and you can read more about that in a critique of that argument with the final chapter in the book. I think there's some really good considerations there that would talk, that really critiques this argument from natural law. And the main problem with the argument from natural law, whichever way you're pleading it, whether for or against particular types of sex acts, the main problem with it is that which part of human nature do you really consider? And isn't it kind of arbitrary, no matter which one you choose, isn't it kind of arbitrary to determine that this is what I'm going to judge off of and nothing else? And so it ends up being kind of a subjective argument. But it is there, and so I definitely want to bring it up and mention it. That is something that is in the literature, so it's good for you to be aware of it. So we've looked at some utilitarian considerations, some deontological considerations. We've looked a bit at the natural law, and the next one that we come to then is divine command. In divine command, if you'll remember, divine command is the idea that God has made the world, and He's created it according to His nature. He is what He is. He's created according to His nature, and then He's commanded according to how He's created the world. And so His commands relate back to a natural law kind of thing that's in the world by virtue of the fact that God has created and made it in the world, and then the world itself reflects His character or His nature. And so how would we then take it back then in terms of divine command? There's certainly the discussion of what exactly constitutes the command of God. Are we going to look in the Bible, for instance? Are we going to look at the Quran? Or are we going to look at some other religious text or tradition or oral tradition or something like that? How do we know what the commands of God are, and how and then how do we employ those? But a person who believes in divine command believes that God is. He exists in His own nature as a certain type of moral being, and morality and goodness is judged on the basis of His nature, which is eternal to Him. And then He's created the world according to His nature, so that the world reflects something about who God is. It reflects something about His character, and so there is a natural law built into creation that reflects the morality of God Himself. And then He's commanded rational beings in His creation to live in such a way that their life would comport with the natural law that is built into creation. So then, according to divine command, sexual morality is grounded in the very nature of God. And you might ask yourself, well, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? That sexual morality is grounded in the nature of God. Well, one thing it's going to mean, one consequence that it's going to have is this: anything that violates the command or the expectation that God has handed down, anything that violates the command that God has given, essentially violates the created order. So it's going to violate nature. And then it also misrepresents God in some sort of essential way, to the point where it violates God Himself and the eternal nature of His character. So that's a bad thing. According to divine command, sex is not just an act committed between two people who can, have sort of an agreement together or are consensually entering into this sexual activity. But sex is created there, or the sexual activity then, and the morality of it is something that will either that could very easily violate the moral nature of God Himself, and so that would be a very bad thing. Different religions would conceive of this different ways. Monotheism would say that just strict monotheism, as we find maybe in the Islamic tradition or Jewish tradition, would say that in His nature God is relational, that He has created human beings in order to be relational, and that He has commanded relationships and certain kinds of